I imagine if you're like me, the past week of your life has been dominated by a lot of conversations about the recent deaths of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain. These were two individuals who were wildly successful, incredibly popular, beloved by millions of people around the world for ways that they had influenced and touched so many lives. And yet, for whatever reason, they felt that it was the right thing for them to do to take their lives. And it's tragic and honestly disturbing to see things like this happen. We see this in the public sphere, and so many of us know of people who've done this personally, and it's devastating and saddening and heartbreaking, honestly. We don't know all the reasons why people make these sorts of decisions and do this sort of thing where they take their own life. But the interesting to me in my dialogues over the past week, and I'm sure you've experienced the same, is that this has unearthed in a lot of people the fact that they feel a sense of desperation or loss or hopelessness or sadness or just disconnection in some way from the world and their life and what's good and all that sort of thing. And it leaves people searching with, okay, I'm not suicidal, but how do I figure out the problems that I do have in my head and in my heart? That's such a nuanced answer, and there's so many different angles and ways to think about that, and answers, really, even from Scripture. But I do think there's one story in particular that gives us some fundamental ideas for whenever we feel a sense of desperation and loss and hopelessness and just like we don't know which way to turn or where to go or what to do. And that is the story of Elijah. And you can read about the story in 1 Kings chapter 18 and 19. Basically, the story goes that in 1 Kings 18, Elijah had done amazing things. He was arguably the most successful prophet that the nation of Israel ever saw, because whenever he had a showdown with the prophets of Baal, a false god, he won. He dominated. God used Elijah to, at least for a moment, turn the hearts of the people back to God. And it was tremendous. But immediately after this great thing happened, the queen of Israel, Jezebel, she told Elijah, I'm going to kill you. I hate what you've done, and I'm going to murder you. So Elijah ran off into the wilderness, which is, of course, often what we do after something really negative happens that we're disappointed with. We isolate ourselves. And Elijah did that, just like we all do. And then God appeared to Elijah, and we're not all going to have God appear to us. But in God's appearance to Elijah, I think he teaches us some things about how we can handle frustrating moments in our lives. The first thing God does, he appears to Elijah and he says, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And you'll find this in 1 Kings chapter 19. So he says, what are you doing here? I love that question. Now Elijah responds, he says, like, God, they've ruined the covenant that they made with you, and they're worshiping false gods, and they've rejected you, and he tells this whole story. And then God doesn't respond. In this cave where Elijah is in the mountains, God sends an earthquake and a fire, and then this gentle blowing, or some translations say a still small voice. And then God comes back to Elijah with the same question. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? It seems to me that God asked that question because it was important for Elijah to take a moment of introspective reflection. Whenever we're feeling disturbed or overwhelmed or some form of maybe circumstantial depression, I'm not talking chemical depression, that's a different conversation, but just circumstantially feeling down and broken, it's important that we take a moment of introspective reflection. What am I doing here? What's going on? What's brought me to this place? And that leads to the second thing. After Elijah gives his answer again, God doesn't really deal with all the things that Elijah is concerned about, but God does say this. He says, okay, go anoint this guy as king of Israel. Go anoint this guy as king of a foreign nation. And go anoint this guy as your successor as prophet. In other words, God says, go out and address needs of people around you. Because all those things that Elijah was sent to do by God weren't really just for Elijah or even for those individuals. It was actually for the nation of Israel as a whole. Whenever I am seeing my world crushed and falling apart, it's important for me to not only take a moment of introspective reflection, think, okay, why am I here? What's gotten me here? Process that out, but then try to think, okay, who can I go out and serve? What can I do for someone else to benefit them? But then there's a third thing. After God asks Elijah, what are you doing here? And then goes and sends Elijah out to serve other people, God brings Elijah to a realization. You know, when Elijah was going through all of his troubles, he said things to God like, I'm the only one going through this. No one else is trying to serve you. No one else is doing right. I'm the only one out here. And it's true sometimes, especially when we isolate, we end up feeling like we're the only ones going through this struggle. We're the only ones dealing with this. We're the only ones. And we feel lonely. And that just furthers whatever crushing loss or disturbance that we feel in our lives. It makes it even worse when we feel like we're the only ones. But then at the end of the conversation, God says, you're not the only one. There are literally thousands of people, 7,000 people, God tells Elijah, who are still fighting for me, still trying to do what's right. There may not be 7,000 people who are going through the same thing you are, but there may be. Actually, there may be a lot more. And it's important that we come to the realization that I'm not really alone in this. I may feel alone, but I'm not. There are plenty of people who have endured the same kinds of hardships and struggles that you're enduring. And maybe more importantly, God himself came to earth and went through all the worst forms of suffering and pain and loss, and he was crushed so that we could be made whole again, so that we wouldn't be alone. So if you're struggling, if you're fighting, find somebody to help remind you of these things, to ask you the question of what are you doing, to take a moment of introspective reflection, to be able to point you in a direction where you can serve others and think about other people more than just yourself, so that you don't feel crushed by all this. And thirdly, maybe that person can remind you that you're not alone, that there are others who go through the same kinds of things that you're going through, and maybe definitely more importantly, God's with you.